Hello, Southern Church. How are you? I'm not sure if I've met you or not, and I'm not able to be there in the flesh. But my name is Daz Farrell. In some ways, I hope that I'm there in spirit. It's an honour to be able to share something of what has been stirring in my sort of soul and my mind and my heart in this time. Steve sent me an email just asking if I would share with you guys some things that have been going on. And when I asked what had been happening for you, he said, as a church, you guys have been in the Psalm of Ascents and, through Thursday, Facebook Live, been doing spiritual disciplines. And I found that actually quite fascinating. I thought, what a beautiful cluster of Psalms to do as we think about why was that pilgrimage up to Jerusalem important for the people of Israel. And I was, unbelievably, it does not feel like this year, but at the start of this year, I was there. And I took that journey, not walking it, but by bus, as I did a tour of the Holy Land. And you are captured by this image. I mean, you're captured by many things when you're there. It's actually overwhelming because there's just so much that comes to life in the scriptures for you. But as you think about the goal of ascending to this holy city of Jerusalem, why was that important? And I really think the answer to this links with so much stuff that I've been thinking about, so much about why you would do spiritual disciplines. And the goal is union with the presence. The people of Israel were excited about going to Jerusalem because this city is where God had decided where the temple was, and the temple is about his presence. So the idea is, you go to Jerusalem, you have an encounter with God, with the presence of God. This is why this is incredibly exciting to take this journey, especially when you're going from, from the ascent, you're doing this journey from the descent. And in some ways, actually that describes just how I feel in this COVID environment. There's been lots of ascents and descents, depending on the days, and Zoom fatigue and other things. And I hope you don't have that today. But I totally understand if you do. It's challenging in this digital space. There is lots of energy spent on it. But that is the thing. We're missing presence. We are missing presence with each other. And Steve had asked me to kind of share about that. Hey, we're thinking about going back. What would you say as we think about returning together? And I was thinking about, because I work for Freshhope and we do pioneering is my charge, new expressions that think about advancing the kingdom. So my head and my mind and my soul, my heart is always in, why do we gather? What are we hoping for when we gather? What shape or design of things would happen why design something a certain way? And what's interesting about this time is, of course, the way that churches gathered has completely changed. Not even really convinced we're gathering, to be honest, with the online thing. And I'm hoping, not saying it's the worst solution that we can have these things, but it isn't presence. And I think that when I look at the goal of the Psalm of Ascents, and I look at my spiritual disciplines, again, the goal in all these things is union. That I might live a life out of loving union with the eternal God. And I think from the very beginning, God has always been concerned with our union with him. Whether it's pre-fall in the garden, which is a really good place to start, because you see this design that God has put into the cosmos, the way that we are wired. And what we were wired was to know God, to be in union with God, to metaphorically walk with him, or maybe literally walk with him in the cool of the day. This idea of being united, union with him. And of course, that's fractured in the fall. And that's noteworthy because in the fall, we ate from a tree called the knowledge of good and evil. And at that point, here's what I want to suggest to you. Life from then on, we actually could no longer know God because we become like God. And so we determined good and evil for ourselves. Whereas before, everything we knew was union. If I can say this, our decision-making framework was relational. Everything we did pre-fall was a relational decision out of our union with God and with other. And I think when you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what happens is you become a judge because you determine what is good and what is evil. So law becomes the paradigm under which you operate, which is fascinating because law is actually now being inserted into our gathering. There was a lot of freedom how Christians could gather. I mean, there were similarities in form between churches all over the world, but really, in many ways, how you expressed love for Jesus could work itself out in many ways. And now we've got laws about saying what you can and can't do in our gathering, which is a challenge, a real challenge. How do we not have those fellowship hugs, and how do we not sing? The people of God have always yearned to express themselves, and song has certainly been one of those ways in which our love for God and each other, I think. That's why we sing psalms, songs, and spiritual songs to one another, as the scriptures say. So we think about this idea of a lot about union, about presence, and about transformation. The word transform, because that's what's happened to the gathering now, it is transformed, it is shifted shape. And it's interesting because that word could be used in lots of contexts, but I actually think it's at the root of the Christian life. The Christian life is one of transformation, a shifting of our shape. And what is interesting about that is that it's not into any shape. There is one shape that we are being shifted into, and that is Jesus. The whole goal of our life is to be in Christ and then be Christ. We are being made into his image. The scriptures would say we're being transformed from one degree of glory to another. So it is a progressive thing. It isn't immediate, but we are being transformed progressively into the image or form of Jesus. So we are, when people say we're his hands and feet, and we are, so all the beautiful characteristics of Jesus, his kindness, his love, his patience, his endurance, his suffering, all these things, this is what we're being shaped into. And I don't want it to be a rabbit warren because I'm just free dialoguing with you here in this talk. But I was thinking about this idea of Jesus, though he was a son, Hebrews says, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And I was thinking obedience, that's interesting because obedience is a commodity of time. My union with God is expressed through obedience. I think that's what it is. But outside of time, I've got perfect union. So Jesus was perfectly united with the Father. As he takes on flesh, he learns obedience to what he suffered, meaning his living in time with us as a human, he expressed his union through obedience to the Father's will. And that's exactly what happens to us. We are expressing our obedience and our love, and that involves suffering in this life. And this has been an acute season of suffering for so many of us in lots of ways, from loneliness to death to all these sorts of things. And the goal of the spiritual practices that we do are union. They are that I would be united with Jesus. And as I understand these things in this union, then hopefully I live a life that looks like him. So I don't want us to ever lose sight of the fact that if the goal of the Christian life is transformation into one form, the image of Jesus, we are all to look like Jesus and embody and therefore represent Jesus to the world around us. That makes a huge difference in a sense, about how we think about gathering. Let me read for you something that Dietrich Bonhoeffer said that has just, in many ways blown my mind recently. He's writing this in 1930-something, 40-something, and this is what he writes. He says, the church has essentially nothing to do with the so-called religious functions of man. Sorry, he uses masculine language here, but it has to do with the whole man in his existence in the world with all of those implications. What matters in the church is not religion, but the form of Christ, and it's taking form amidst a band of men and women. If we allow ourselves to lose sight of this, even for an instant, we inevitably relapse into that program planning for the ethical or religious shaping of the world, which was where we set out from. The only formation is formation by and into the form of Jesus Christ. And that is the goal of our gathering. So when we come together, what does that mean? There are now certain rules and regulations around us, but I guess I just want to remind you that God has always been concerned that we take on the image and likeness of Jesus. And it comes from union. It doesn't come from a knowledge of good and evil paradigm. Let me read for you my reading this morning, which is quite linked in some ways. This is Jesus going through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and the disciples are hungry, and so they start breaking the heads of the grain to eat. And the Pharisees, now think of what Pharisees are: law people, It's about law. It's about what's good and evil. And they go, in their paradigm of good and evil, they did not see that these disciples were experiencing union with Jesus. That's not what they saw. They saw disobedience to the Sabbath, a law, a rule. And Jesus says, haven't you read in the scriptures what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He went into the house of God, and he and his companions broke the law by eating the bread of the presence, or sacred loaves, that only the priests who are mediators between God and men, are allowed to eat. And haven't you read in the law of Moses that the priests on duty in the temple may work on the Sabbath? I tell you, there is one here, or some versions say there is something here, greater than the temple. What a phenomenal picture. These law-based people are getting frustrated because the disciples, they're with Jesus. And because they are united in God and united in his purposes for the world, the lawmakers, those who determine good and evil, say, no, you're breaking the law. And Jesus says, actually, haven't you read? And here's the interesting thing. Again, this temple imagery comes up in this particular verse. Again, the temple, presence, the bread of presence, priests mediate presence. Again, this whole idea of presence is there. And Jesus says, I'm Lord of that. Something greater than the temple is here because God is present with you now in incarnation, in flesh, and you don't see it. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, he goes on to say. This is phenomenal. That I am stunned when I think about the mystery of the incarnation, that God takes on flesh, and in taking on flesh, he vindicates humanity because he forever becomes a man. In his resurrection, he captures us all up. In the resurrection of Christ, we are vindicated. Humanity is vindicated and caught up again into union. The obstacle, our original design, our original state was to know God. And then in this brokenness, the scandal of the gospel is that God says, I'm going to restore that union. I'm going to deal with the obstacles to union between you and me. Your rebellion, your sin is about your knowledge of good and evil. So sometimes our sin isn't just our moral immorality, it's actually the good things we do that try and earn favor with God. It's our good works that we need to also repent of. And God says, I'm going to destroy all that is in the way of you and me being in union. I'm going to give you my Son. And then I am going to give you myself, my Holy Spirit. And as part of the resurrection, Jesus put the Spirit sent from the Father and the Son is now given to us. So this beautiful union where God indwells us and then we are caught up into the mystery of the Trinity. I think it's mind-blowing. I think this is why angels long to look into this. Even as I'm saying it, I'm kind of like, this is just phenomenal. This phenomenal idea of the intimacy in what God is desiring in our union and our life with him. So God has done everything. The cosmos is all about this now. The cosmos is experiencing now this restoration process, and there's a cry. There's a cry from creation waiting for the sons of God to be revealed. There is this union to which we are all headed. One day, brother and sister, sitting in Southern Church or looking online, wherever you are in this talk, you are going to see Jesus face to face. You are going to experience a union that you can't even possibly imagine. And I think it's worth thinking about that. And then I think it's worth, when we think about coming together, that our coming together at least points to that reality. That there is a union that's coming that can be tasted in part now. It is partially there now, but it's going to be fully fulfilled when Jesus fully consummates his kingdom. I think that, therefore, we could get caught up on stay 1.5 meters apart and don't, sing and don't like. But brother and sister, I want to say, when you come together, the goal is that you are being formed into the likeness of Christ. And there is great freedom as to the mechanisms for how you're formed. Whether that's the hearing of the word, the reading of the word, one-on-one discipleship, sharing your struggles, sharing your vulnerabilities, seeing where you're living from wounds, understanding why you operate how you do, seeing where you are not in union, where there is disunion or disintegration in your life, and then bringing it before God and saying, God, could you integrate me? Could you bring me back into the union? Because at the moment I'm not in union. And so this whole idea is that we are being transformed through presence. And so I want to remind you of the power of the church, because what changes the world is not the things that we do, it's the transformative presence you offer people. as you listen receptively, discerning what God is saying as you're listening to this person speak, and then just a timely word that comes in. You change atmospheres by being united to Christ. And so whether externally we get to do this or don't get to do that, I mean, we walk in wisdom and we are to obey the law of the land. But the power resides in a group of people who are saying, God, I can't transform anything about myself, but you can. So would you fill us? Would you inhabit the praises of your people, even if they're silent? Would you see to it that this group of people gathering here look more like your Son today than we did yesterday? Would that degree of glory shift by our coming together? And I kind of wanted to say, the mechanics of your gathering, okay, you have freedom to work that out, but I would say don't ever lose the intent. Bonhoeffer warns that we can go into a programmatic, ethical No, the goal is that each of you, as you're being transformed into the likeness of Jesus, shapes the world around you in your spheres of influence. And when you come together, there is a celebration of all of this. There is the encouraging one another. There's a sharpening one another. But I would remind you that Hebrews 3:13 says to encourage or exhort one another daily while it's called today, lest your heart get hardened by sin's deceitfulness. So there is this sense in which you are always, in your seeking of transformation, there is actually a daily to it. There's a daily one anothering to it. There is a daily union to it. So there's some thoughts for you. I was working out how to land this jumbo jet because there's a lot of big ideas in there. But I guess I wanted to say, as I was thinking about transformation and presence, thinking about the mystery of God catching you up into union with Him, and then reminding you that what you offer the world is your transformative self. That is what will change the world around you.